The champagne flute hit the cabin floor and shattered into 100 glittering pieces, and for one frozen second, nobody on Aurelia Airways Flight 117 breathed. I said, "Move her. Now." Vivian Ashford's voice cut through the hush of the first-class cabin like a blade dragged across glass. She was pointing one manicured finger at the woman in seat 2. A quiet woman in a faded grey cardigan and scuffed flat shoes. A woman who hadn't said a single rude word to anyone. "I am not flying 11 hours next to that. Do your job and remove her." The woman in seat 2A didn't flinch. She folded her hands in her lap, looked up with the calm of someone who had nowhere left to fall, and said softly, "It's all right. Take your time." She had no idea yet that by the time this plane landed, Vivienne Ashford's entire life would be in ruins. And Vivienne had no idea who she had just chosen as her enemy. Let me back up 20 minutes, to the moment the boarding doors were still open. Her name was Naomi Vale, and she was 26 years old. She boarded early, before the rush, carrying a single soft canvas bag and a paper cup of cheap airport coffee. Her cardigan was the kind you buy in a 3-pack. Her shoes were worn at the heel. She wore no jewelry except a thin silver band on her right hand, and her dark chestnut hair was pulled back in a loose, practical knot. If you passed her in a terminal, you would not look twice. That was exactly the point. What none of the other passengers knew, what not even the crew on this particular flight had been told, was that Naomi Vale owned the airline they were all sitting in. Every seat, every engine, every uniform. The name painted in gold on the tail of the aircraft was the company her late father had built from 2 leased planes and a stubborn dream, and the company she had quietly taken full control of just 4 months earlier. She wasn't flying first class because she liked luxury. She was flying anonymously, dressed like an ordinary traveler with an ordinary economy budget, because she had made herself one promise the day she signed the ownership papers. She would never run a company from behind a glass desk. She wanted to feel, with her own skin, exactly how Aurelia treated a person who looked like they had nothing. So she'd booked the ticket under a different last name, told no one, and stepped on board as a nobody. The first thing she noticed was the smell of fresh coffee and warm towels. The second thing she noticed was the lead flight attendant, a young woman named Camila with kind, tired eyes who greeted every passenger by name and meant it. Camila knelt to help an elderly man with his seatbelt. She found a coloring book for a restless little boy in 3C. When she reached Naomi, she smiled the same warm smile she'd given the men in tailored suits. "Welcome aboard. Can I get you anything before we push back? Water, juice, a blanket?" "Water would be perfect. Thank you, Camila." Naomi read her name tag and tucked the name away in her memory, the way her father used to. He'd known every mechanic, every gate agent, every cleaner by name. "People remember how you make them feel," he used to say. "Remember them first. For a few minutes, everything was gentle and good." Naomi sipped her water and watched the morning light slide along the wing. Then the air changed. Vivienne Ashford arrived, the way a storm arrives. You hear it before you see it. She came down the jet bridge already complaining, a phone pressed to her ear, a small dog in a designer carrier, 3 shopping bags she refused to hand to anyone, and sunglasses she did not take off indoors. She was the only daughter of the Ashford real estate fortune, a woman who had spent 34 years being told that the world existed to arrange itself around her comfort. She paused at the cabin entrance, lowered her sunglasses, and surveyed first class like a queen inspecting a room she had decided to be disappointed by. Then her eyes landed on Naomi. You could watch the judgment happen in real time. Vivienne's gaze traveled from the worn shoes, up the cheap cardigan, to the loose knot of hair and the paper coffee cup. Her lip curled. "Excuse me," she said to Camila, loud enough for the whole cabin to hear. "There's been a mistake. Someone's sitting in the wrong cabin." Camila checked her tablet. Seat 2A is correctly assigned, ma'am. Is there an issue with your seat? You're in 2B. 2B. Vivian said the words like they tasted bad. Next to her. No, absolutely not. She looked at Naomi the way you'd look at a stain on a white couch. Sweetheart, I don't know how you got up here, a point scam, a charity upgrade, whatever, but this cabin is for people who actually paid. Run along to the back where you belong before you embarrass yourself. Naomi looked at her calmly. I paid for this seat, she said, but I'm happy to help if there's been a mix-up. Don't speak to me. Vivienne recoiled as if the words themselves were dirty. God, even your voice is exhausting. A businessman across the aisle, a graying man in a navy suit named Mr. Okafor, lowered his newspaper and frowned. The little boy in 3C had gone quiet. Camila's smile had frozen into something careful and professional, the smile of an employee who knows the next 10 minutes are going to be ugly. Here is the thing about Naomi Vale that Vivienne could not have known by looking at her. She had spent the worst 2 years of her life invisible. After her father got sick, before the company was hers, she had worked nights as a cleaner in the very airport she now half-owned, mopping the floors of gates where passengers stepped over her without a glance. She knew exactly what it felt like to be treated like furniture. So when Vivienne sneered at her, Naomi did not feel humiliated. She felt something colder and clearer than that. She felt like she was finally seeing the truth of how her company behaved when the boss wasn't supposed to be watching, so she stayed quiet. She let it unfold, and it got worse. Vivienne refused to sit. She stood in the aisle, blocking boarding, demanding a supervisor, demanding the woman be removed, demanding a free upgrade to the empty suite in row 1 as compensation for the trauma of being seated next to a vagrant. She pulled out her phone and started filming Naomi's face. Everyone should see what this airline lets crawl into first class, she announced to the cabin. Ma'am, I have to ask you to lower your phone and take your seat, Camila said. Her voice was steady, but Naomi saw her hands trembling around the tablet. Or what? Vivienne snapped. Do you know who my family is? One phone call and you're unemployed. One phone call and this entire airline gets buried in lawyers. Now move her out. And that was when the flute slipped from the galley counter behind Camila, knocked by Vivienne's flailing shopping bag, and shattered on the floor. Which brings us back to where we started. The frozen cabin, the glittering glass, and Naomi Vale quietly saying, It's all right, take your time. The senior purser, a calm man named David with 22 years in the air, arrived from the forward galley. He'd heard the commotion. He crouched to help clear the glass, then stood and addressed Vivienne with the practiced patience of a man who had diffused 1,000 tantrums at 35,000 feet. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but this passenger is in her correctly assigned seat and she has done nothing wrong. We can offer you a different seat in this cabin, or I don't want a different seat. I want her gone. Vivienne's voice climbed. Are you people deaf? She doesn't belong here. Look at her. Smell her. People like me do not sit next to people like that. That's not cruelty. That's standards. Now either you remove the homeless woman, or I will make sure every single one of you is fired by the time we land. Starting with the little one with the shaking hands. Camila's face went pale, and something in the cabin shifted. Mr. Okafor folded his newspaper and set it down hard. That's enough, he said quietly. You've made your point. There isn't a person on this plane who agrees with you. Was I talking to you? Vivienne whirled on him. You were talking to all of us, he said, loudly, for 10 minutes. Naomi watched it all and stayed still. This was the moment her father had taught her about without ever using these words. The moment when you find out who people are, not when it's easy. When it costs something. She watched David refuse to throw Camila under the bus. She watched Mr. Okafor risk his own comfort to defend a stranger. She watched a flight attendant near the galley quietly pour a fresh glass of water and bring it to her without being asked, just to show, in the only way she could, whose side she was on. Micro-victories, small lights in a dark moment. Naomi felt her chest tighten with something that was almost pride. "Sir," David said to Vivienne, his patience finally thinning to its last thread, "I am going to ask you one more time to take a seat so we can depart. If you continue to disrupt the cabin and refuse crew instructions, I'll have no choice but to involve the captain and, if necessary, request that you be removed from the aircraft." "Remove me?" Vivienne laughed an ugly, disbelieving sound. "You're going to remove me? Do you have any idea how much my family flies this pathetic airline? Do you know how much money walks off this plane if I make one call? You don't remove me. You remove her." She jabbed her finger at Naomi again. "She is nothing. She is nobody. And the day an airline picks a piece of trash in a thrift store sweater over an Ashford is the day it goes bankrupt." The cabin was silent, and Naomi Vale stood up. She did it slowly, smoothing her cardigan, setting her paper cup down with care. She wasn't tall, and in her worn flats she barely reached Vivienne's shoulder. But there was a stillness to her now, a settled weight, that made the whole cabin turn to watch. "You're right about one thing," Naomi said. Her voice was quiet, but every word landed. "An airline that picks money over people should go bankrupt." She turned to David. "What's your name? Your full name. I want to remember it." David blinked. "David Mensah, ma'am, senior purser, 22 years. The wings on your jacket say 20 years of service plus the captain's club pin. 22. Naomi nodded slowly. "And you," she said to the young attendant. "Camila Reyes. You greeted every passenger in this cabin by name. You knelt down to help Mr. Heiress with his belt in 4D. You found a coloring book for the little boy. You did everything right today, and you were threatened for it." Camila's mouth opened. No sound came out. Vivienne rolled her eyes. "Oh, wonderful. The homeless woman knows everyone's names. Are we done with the little speech? Some of us have actual lives." Naomi turned to face her fully. "My name," she said, "is Naomi Vale." The name meant nothing to Vivienne. She stared blankly, but David Mensah's face changed. Slowly, like a man watching the ground rearrange itself beneath his feet, he looked from Naomi's worn cardigan to her calm eyes, and the color drained from his cheeks. 22 years. He'd been at the company long enough to remember the founder. He'd been at the staff memorial 4 months ago. He'd seen the photograph on the wall of the executive lounge, the founder's daughter, standing beside her father's portrait the day she took control. "Miss Vale," he said, and his voice cracked. I didn't recognize." "You weren't supposed to," Naomi said gently. "That was the point." "What is happening?" Vivienne demanded. "Who is she? Why are you talking to a beggar like she matters?" David straightened to his full height. When he spoke, his voice carried through the entire cabin, steady and clear. "This is Naomi Vale," he said. "She is the owner of Aurelia Airways. She owns this aircraft. She owns the one you flew in on last month. She signs the paychecks of every crew member you've spent the last 15 minutes threatening to fire." The silence that followed had a texture to it. You could have heard a pin drop into a snowbank. Vivienne laughed, a small, panicked, disbelieving laugh. That's absurd. Look at her. She's wearing a sweater from a discount bin. Owners don't dress like." She stopped, because Naomi had reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a slim leather folder, and inside it was a single laminated card, an executive identification card bearing her photograph, her name, and one word in gold beneath it. Owner. She didn't wave it around. She simply held it where Vivienne could see, and then put it away. "I dress like this," Naomi said, "because I wanted to know how my airline treats a woman who looks like she has nothing. Now I know." She looked at the phone still clutched in Vivian's hand. "You were filming, weren't you?" "Good. So was the cabin camera above the galley. Every word you said today is recorded. The part where you called a paying passenger trash. The part where you threatened to have my crew fired for doing their jobs with kindness. The part where you said an airline that chooses people over money deserves to go bankrupt." Naomi's mouth curved, not unkindly. "I'd like a copy, for my records." Vivian's face had gone the color of old paper. You can't. I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Naomi said softly. "You only treat people with respect when you think they can hurt you. That isn't respect. That's fear, wearing a nice coat." For the first time in perhaps her entire adult life, Vivian Ashford had nothing to say. The captain's voice came over the PA David had quietly radioed forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have a brief delay at the gate. Cabin crew, please prepare for a passenger offload in first class." Vivian's head snapped up. "Offload? You're putting me off the plane? Do you know who I am?" "My father." "I know exactly who you are," Naomi said. "Vivian Ashford. And I want you to understand something, because I think no one has ever told you the truth before, so I'll do it gently. Your father's money is your father's. It has never once been yours. You have spent your whole life spending a reputation you didn't build and a fortune you didn't earn, and you thought it made you better than a woman in a gray sweater. It doesn't. It never did." She paused. "You are welcome to fly. You are not welcome to fly with us. Aurelia Airways will be cancelling your travel account and the corporate Ashford account, effective the moment we land. You'll find we're not the only carrier in the world. But you may find that word travels." "You can't do that," Vivian whispered. "Do you have any idea what my family will? Threaten me with lawyers?" Naomi tilted her head. "I have a building full of them. They're quite good. They were very interested to hear about the executive who threatened crew with termination and harassed a passenger on camera." She turned away, as if Vivian had already become part of the past. "Mr. Mensah, would you escort Miss Ashford to the gate, please? With every courtesy. She's still a human being, even today." That last line did what nothing else had. Vivian's eyes filled not with anger now, but with the dawning, sickening understanding of a person who has just watched the floor of her own self-image fall away. She had expected to be fought. She had expected screaming, a scene, a war she knew how to win. Instead, she'd been handed dignity she hadn't offered to anyone, and somehow that was the thing that broke her. She gathered her bags with shaking hands. The little dog whined. As she passed seat 2A, she stopped. For a second, it looked like she might say something cruel out of pure reflex. Then her shoulders dropped. "I'm sorry," she said, barely a whisper. The first real apology, perhaps, of her entire life. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. "I believe you," she said. "Use it. Be different tomorrow than you were today. That's the only way any of this means anything." And then Vivian Ashford walked off the plane, smaller than she had ever felt, into a terminal where her name still echoed on signs and buildings, and somehow none of it could help her now. But the story wasn't over, because Naomi Vale was not the kind of woman who only knew how to take things away. She knew how to give, too. After they were airborne Naomi back in 2A, the cabin slowly exhaling, she asked David and Camilla to come speak with her quietly, one at a time. To David Mensah, 22 years in the sky, she said, "You protected your crew when it would have been easier to sacrifice one of them. You stayed kind when you were threatened. That's the kind of judgment I can't teach. There's a base manager position opening at our Western hub. I'd like you to consider it. Same flying schedule if you want it, but with the authority to make sure no crew of yours ever stands alone in a moment like that again." David, a grown man with 2 decades of turbulence behind him, had to look out the window for a moment before he could answer. To Camila Reyes, whose hands had trembled but who had still found the courage to bring a stranger a glass of water just to say, "I see you," Naomi said, "You were the best of this airline today. Not the most senior, the best. I started where you are. I want you in our leadership training program, if you'll come. People who are kind under pressure are exactly who I want shaping how this company treats the next nervous traveler in a cheap sweater." Camila cried. Then she laughed. Then she cried again and hugged the owner of the airline in the middle of the aisle, and Naomi hugged her back like a sister. Mr. Okafor, the businessman who'd folded his newspaper and said that's enough, found a chilled bottle of the cabin's best sparkling water waiting at his seat with a handwritten note. For the man who spoke up when it cost him something. The world needs more of you. Noint V. He read it twice, then tucked it into his breast pocket, over his heart. And the little boy in 3C got a pair of plastic captain's wings and a tour of the flight deck after they landed, because Naomi remembered that her father had once done the same for a frightened 5-year-old on a delayed flight, and that 5-year-old had grown up to build an airline. The video of Vivienne Ashford's tantrum did travel, the way she'd feared. Not because Naomi released it, she never did, but first-class cabins are small, and people have phones, and the story of the heiress who screamed at a woman in a grey sweater, only to learn the woman owned the plane, was simply too perfect not to spread. The Ashford name, which had opened every door for 34 years, suddenly closed a few. Charity boards stopped returning Vivienne's calls. The country club found her membership under review. Money, it turned out, could buy almost everything except the one thing she'd thrown away in 15 minutes at 35,000 feet, the benefit of the doubt. Here's what I keep thinking about, though. Months later, a letter arrived at Aurelia's head office, handwritten, addressed to Naomi Vale personally. It was from Vivienne. She wrote that she'd been really volunteering, not for a photo at a shelter near the airport. She wrote that she still heard Naomi's voice in her head, "Be different tomorrow than you were today." She wrote that she was trying. She didn't ask for her travel account back. She just said thank you for being kinder to me than I deserved. Naomi kept that letter in the same leather folder as her owner's card, because the card reminded her what she'd built, and the letter reminded her why. So here's the truth this whole thing comes down to, the thing Naomi's father told her when she was small and never let her forget. You can learn everything you need to know about a person by watching how they treat someone who can do nothing for them. Wealth doesn't reveal character. Power doesn't reveal character. How you treat the woman in the grey sweater, the man mopping the floor, the kid who's scared on his first flight, that's the whole test. That's all of it. Money is loud, dignity is quiet, and in the end, quiet wins. Now I want to hear from you. If you'd been sitting across the aisle in that first-class cabin, would you have spoken up like Mr. Okafor? Or would you have hidden behind your newspaper and hoped someone else did it for you? Be honest. And second question, do you think Vivienne truly changed, or do you think people only ever pretend? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one, and the best conversations on this channel happen down there. If this story moved you even a little, do me a quick favor, tap that like button so it reaches one more person who needs the reminder today. Share it with someone who treats waiters and cleaners like royalty. And subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the next story you won't be able to forget. I've got a brand new one dropping soon, and trust me, you're going to want to be in the room when the truth comes out. I'll see you there.